So again, I think I mentioned, or I may not have mentioned, part of the genesis of today, I went to Catapult Future Fest in Oslo, where I met some of the wonderful folks in the room in May. And one of the things that struck me, they had an investor day before their main kind of conference, and there was such a different atmosphere. People were so open and giving and sharing, and I realized that it's actually really part of it is because they weren't worried about being pitched to. And I realized that those coming from the investment perspective actually need a space where they can just connect with each other. And so that's part of the thesis of today, but it doesn't end there. Of course, we've got Transformative Impact Summit. If you weren't here earlier to hear, everyone here is welcome. By being here, you have access to that. And so, the idea is that from the beginning, Transformative Impact Summit, we have 12 impact tracks. I won't get into it now. One of them is financial innovation, regenerative financing, and philanthropy. And part of the reason was we wanted investors to want to be at that event because we know that it adds to the event as a whole. But it had to be because it was actually of interest. And so the weekend, starting tomorrow, is about looking not just at solutions, it is big picture perspectives and innovative, I wouldn't say ideas, because we're really trying to focus on those who are way beyond the idea stage. At the same time, there is even content, there is information, there are perspectives that are kind of only interesting or only of value to this community. And so next up, welcome back. Next up, we have three very powerful speakers or panelists, Jeff Hammer, Jed Emerson, and Tim Freundlich, probably mispronouncing that, who are both, or are all supporting large flows at scale. And so the focus of this next panel is reflections on the purpose of capital and total portfolio management. Let's welcome them up.
There he is. How are you? Great to see you. So this is going to be a trialogue because we have not actually connected before, as you just could intuit from that question. But I thought maybe what we could do is start with just some reflections on the purpose of capital and as it relates to family offices. I've known and worked with Tim in any number of ways over the years, and I'm looking forward to hearing your journey and how you're plugging into this whole process as well. So I think we'll just start with some very light framing and then just see where it goes, if that's okay with everybody. These conversations are really hard because every single comment that was made previous to our session right now are things that we could all riff off of and go in other directions. So I'm going to try to be very focused and not go down rat holes of all these other things that are really interesting that I'd love to pick up on, that maybe we can pick up on in the conversation part. When we talk about the purpose of capital and we think about how that topic is taught at business schools, the purpose of capital is to seek its highest and best use for the least amount of lockup and assumption of risk. That's the purpose of capital. The problem is when we're talking about family offices, that's often not the purpose of capital, right? And the purpose of capital actually can be many different things. And what we forget is that our understanding of the purpose of capital is actually a social construct, that a group of people came together and they said, how do we think about this? How do we think about managing this? What does this look like? It's culturally grounded. As we experience it today, it's a Western construct. And the fact is every asset owner, every family has to go through its own process of exploring and understanding and defining for itself what is the purpose of capital. And I think this is really both the opportunity and the challenge of working with family offices and with families who are ultra high net worth and are really grappling with the challenges of complex wealth. In my case, I've worked with families for probably 15 years, 20 years, and currently I'm Chief Impact Officer with a multifamily office called AlTi Tiedemann Global. We have about $70 billion in assets. We have probably $5 to $6 billion that's dedicated impact capital, probably 300 families. probably 150 of which are pursuing impact in various ways. And the trick is, what's wrong with impact investing in this context is that it has devolved to a set of strategies and practices. And so you end up with, my fund is the, going to be the answer to poverty. My fund is the answer for health services. Fund me, right? And you end up in this oppositional posture between asset owners and people who are trying to raise capital. And they're all passionate. They're all very committed. They're all very talented. And they all are convinced of the kind of righteousness of their execution and strategy and practice, right? So you begin from a place of not co-creating the future of finance, but kind of defending yourself, either as a family, as an asset owner, as an intermediary, whatever it is. And so right there, there's a fundamental disconnect between how we understand and create a space to collaborate around an understanding of advancing the purpose of capital in an alternative way from what we're presented with. So I'm going to stop there. I will say one thing in the vein of self-promotion, which is the last book that I did is called The Purpose of Capital. You can get a free digital versions at purposeofcapital.org. There's a reader's guide, teaching notes, and even a music video if you don't have time to read the fucking book, right? And so I encourage you to go and video, just download it. I say it again? Good. Yeah, it's a great video. But anyway, because we got to find it, to enter the conversation, we have to blow open the context of the discussion. We got to kind of take control and own what it is that this is about, and not let the people who think that they understand finance define the terms of finance, because it's really something that we have to really kind of explore in a different way. So I know what Tim's going to say. I don't know what Jeff's going to say. So I'm going to pivot to Jeff and just ask you to say a few words about kind of your journey and path, and why is it that Elliot thought you would be a contributor to this conversation?
Yeah, well, thanks so much. And I definitely appreciate Elliot's invitation and being part of this. One of the things that I found is I've had several walks in life. With some of the things early on in life, I did some work with the Department of Defense, got to lead some aircraft engines, helicopters, business units, backed into an IT career, led some systems implementations there and at Capital One, backed into a mergers and acquisitions background. Loved the work I was doing, but one of the things I looked around at was it was 50 million nameless, faceless clients. Couldn't see what the impact was. And so as a result of that, we started to find some unique opportunities with folks to say, having walked in some of these business footprints, to say, where can we find those opportunities for leverage? And so that was something where about 14 years ago, stepped into this particular space. We've made some amazing connections with folks who have a tremendous heart, a tremendous vision, a lot of folks who are going through the business exit path. And as a result of that, we're seeing 40% of businesses that are going to be changing hands in the next 5 years alone. One individual we work with is on her 33rd business exit. And so it's a unique opportunity to say, how are they going to deploy that capital differently? And the same thing we also found was that there was a remarkable transition that's happening right now to the next generations of wealth. There's 35 trillion changing hands this decade, another 93 trillion by the end of 2040. And it is coming to those next generations who are coming in saying, hey, we want to honor mom and dad's, grandma and grandpa's legacy, but tobacco's not our thing. So how do we pivot and change? And so they're coming in with a renewed energy, but also this unique need for education to say, how do we deploy this differently? And so that was a part of what we found was through some of the work we're doing in the wealth management side and on the consulting side was to say there were an awful lot of tools that we can deploy with that same concept of getting leverage off of that. So that's what drew me to it.
That's great. And Tim, as you are a part of this conversation for, 30 years or something, even given your youthful history, what is
26 years, 2 months, 7 days, and
so what is it
now and then?
What's new and different today from where we all were with purpose-driven capital 30 years ago? What
26?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was just reading this Stanford Social Innovation Review piece, a survey of impact investors who said that it was actually just as easy to do impact investing and get market rates and be fulfilled as it was to do conventional investing. So that's different.
Well, that's a relief to me.
Yeah, that really relieved me. I mean, that just really built a lot of comfort that we must really be pushing ourselves to an uncomfortable place and really, and moving things in a deeply meaningful way, because it's easier to do that than to not do that. which is bullshit, right? So there's something wrong. I think that we've got something right. Like we're on base culturally and with wealth holders in the United States, at least, which is the market I know, in that people are implementing and integrating much more of a full spectrum of impact strategies into their work. But the fact that people think or that there's a sense that we've kind of like we've done something and it's enough and it's easier than actually what we were doing before is I think probably misleading to what's really on the table now in terms of where we're going. Here I was writing down right before you said it, I was writing like collective action, collective intelligence on my little pad, and then it came out of your mouth seated in this chair, and I thought that was kind of odd. So there's a little mind meld, but I do see, I think what's changing now is a moral hunger, as Catherine Fulton used to say at Monitor Institute way back when we were starting SOCAP in 2008 or whatever. And the appetite in the air with the people I work with, and it's about 2,700 families and institutions that impact assets that have brought together a few $1 billion in a collective endowment that's organized around impact investing. I think collective action and collective intelligence is sort of the next, and layering in and leaning into a systems theory and maintaining a systems point of view that's multi-stakeholder. I think that's where we need to go. And in doing that, the design principle that needs to really be centered is proximate leadership being centered. And by proximate leadership, another I feel like Stanford Social Innovation Review, I don't even have a subscription, but has come up a lot. There's a really good article if you just go in there and hit proximate leaders, it'll pop up. And this idea of building of, by, and for communities, of, by, and for the folks that need the solutions that we're funding needs to be, it can't just be lip service, it needs to be centered. And understanding a system and the effects of different levers on the system and maintaining that and investing as family offices, as individuals with our vocational career, our paths, and as the organizations that we're running, really committing to an ongoing, maintained, and inclusive systems theory that then your strategic plan comes from. And of course, centered in that is your why and your purpose and this and that. And I just don't see, I was talking to like some major foundation and the other day about what they're like, oh, we bring in consultants every 3 years. That's our systems theory, maintenance strategy. Like that's not like a strategic plan, as often refreshed as it might be, is not maintaining that. So I think that's what I'm kind of hearing out in the field and from the front lines of the impact investing world, to answer your question, are those themes. And I think there's a lot of richness in there.
Sure. Well, and I think to get into the conversation, you have to come from a place of integration and wholeness. And part of the challenge is that the traditional approach to finance and investing is founded on a bifurcated understanding of value, that you either do well or you do good. You work for a nonprofit or a for-profit, you make a gift or you make an investment. And the reality, I think, is that value is fundamentally whole. And the way that translates to wealth management is to say that capital really falls across this spectrum or continuum from philanthropic to near market to market rate. Across that continuum today, in a way you literally didn't have 30 years ago, you have an array of like managers, strategies, instruments, each of which have their own risk return impact profile. And the challenge is that a lot of folks think that to this other conversation around that Hirad was hitting at the end, in terms of that the answer is not here. It's part of what we have to like create going forward, is that it's predicated, as a wealth advisor, you're supposed to have the answer, right? You're not supposed to be like, well, I don't know. It's kind of, it could be this, it could be that. It's kind of like, what the fuck? They'll leave you, right? So there's this really interesting redesign of the relationship where you have to, we talk about it as client collaborators as opposed to clients as customers or objects that you're selling into or all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's part of it. And the systems change piece at the family level is understanding that holistic frame of wealth management and understanding that systems change begins at home. that you as individual asset owners, as people who are engaged in this work, you need to be reflective. And again, I've got a lot of criticisms of impact investing, but one of them is that what's wrong with impact investing is it's devolved to a set of things you do to other people. It's kind of like, how many jobs did you create? How many acres did you set aside? And we've lost this notion of mutual impact, where we understand that impact investing can be a process of transforming yourself as you seek to transform the world. And by opening ourselves to new relationships and conversations with stakeholders, with folks who should be really fundamental and centered within that systems change process of change, that's how we get out of our own way to become more of the other, if you will. And so the self and other become more whole and experiential on that. And I guess as you've gone through the stages that you've gone through in terms of your own experience in these different roles that are very different kind of experiential places to enter the conversation, I'm wondering how have you seen that evolve, either in terms of the folks you're working with and on behalf of, or just for you personally as you've kind of go through those transitions?
Yeah, thank you. So some of the things we've seen there in that particular case have really been around understanding that these things can have domino effects. We tend to liken it to, by understanding the causality, we can link these together. Quick example, we have a gentleman we've done some work with. He's doing some amazing work in climate change, but he's in an industry that is incredibly intensive as far as carbon generation. And so one of the things that he has done is in the concrete space, he has developed the means of using it for carbon mineralization. He's come up with a unique methodology to say, how do we measure the carbon neutrality or the impact of each building? What are the ways that can be done to mitigate that? And then also creating an international standard that is now generating its own intellectual property capabilities, such that, each bag of cement that comes out now has a logo on it. Taking some of that, those revenues from that, to now fund research into the next stage of carbon mineralization opportunities, which then funds the next generation of his business, which gives it this iterative ecosystem to say, now what else can he do from the good from that? Similarly, we've seen other folks, I know the gentleman earlier was mentioning about in the IP space, we do a lot of work with a lot of folks there that are seeing that unique opportunity where they have that platform. 61% of fans want to see that they care about something, whether they're in the sports space, the high profile, the family office community that has that visible profile. They want to see, what do you care about? And that is the thing that can draw them further attention to it, to start to lead to some of these larger ecosystems and the collaborations that Elliot was talking about earlier with how do we interweave these tapestries so that folks can come en masse to help support these particular causes. We're loving seeing that. Different ways that we're using in life insurance, for example, to get a multiplier. That was one of the great things that showed us just even the scale of it. Young man on our team, 20 years old, as an intern, $9 a month. We realized he was a $100,000 donor. And you talk about leverage. Now we're seeing these unique opportunities. How do we use things like that? The charitable trust, a lot of different vehicles that, if each of my 3 kids, for example, came into $1 million, one's going to invest it, one's going to give it away, third one's buying a helicopter. Helicopter board, we might say, needs a little more time. And so as a result, what are the ways we can use charitable trust to boomerang it out for a while, get it out of our taxable estate, get it to the next generation and say, let's do some good in the meantime. A lot of fun things we can do in that space. So that's where we've enjoyed interweaving.
And so, Tim, you've spent a lot of your career really innovating in the donor advised fund space and figuring out, and Impact Assets now has somewhere in the order of $3 billion. And, you were saying the number of families. Maybe you could highlight some of the innovations that you've seen in that area and how people have been able to use DAFs to basically get out of the way of the traditional bifurcated do well or do good kind of framework.
Well, there's sort of, it's endemic to the thing. And if you think about like a charitable endowment pocket, you've already detached Milton Friedman to some extent. You've sort of put it into a place where it is got the ingredients to be as audacious and as integrative as it could possibly be and as aligned with. So people, it tends to be a very good place for people to explore. And family foundations, same thing to some extent, but they don't usually have the scale and the architecture to support kind of radical action. Whereas what we found is by pulling everybody together, we can create one common architecture as a cooperative, resource, and then allow people to get very creative. I do think, and intersectionality is the word that kept popping in my head as we're kind of walking around. And I think there's intersectionality around thematic and intra thematic relationships, like, climate meets justice and equity issues in communities, frontline communities. There's a ton of stuff going on there, and being able to explore that. But, when you get to the sort of the full spectrum capital, sounds like some kind of sport that you don't want to watch on cable. But the full spectrum of capital is, it is when you can really start looking into sort of what do you want to do in between the grants and the sort of risk adjusted but impactful and aligned activity, and getting very creative in that with recoverable grants, or, just very innovative structures around revenue rights to nonprofits that nonprofits can actually structure with other nonprofits, which charitable endowments are. You can do all sorts of stuff. And so that's, I think, the idea of full spectrum capital. Can't even say it with a straight face. The full spectrum of capital and innovation that can be done interacting with the intersectionality of themes, and then putting a systems overlay in that, so you actually have like a point of view about how they interrelate and which tools you pick up in service to, as we were, chitty-chatting before, in service to the why of what you're trying to accomplish, not because you're walking around with a hammer trying to bash private equity deals into your like little block building set.
To make it look like impact, because in truth, all capital, all companies have impact. So everybody's a fucking impact investor, right? So let's not have all these definitional terms and metrics and all the, are you an impact first, or are you a finance first, right? I hate all that, right? I mean, we got to get rid of all that and come into this sense that it's basically, we're already all in. We are all complicit in the eco side. We're all complicit in, social and
Not examining it.
injustice. Yeah, it is. But let's just like set our own shit aside a little bit here and try to really, co-create just in this way, different way. So this all sounds great. I mean, obviously, we all have the answers for what needs to happen. So I think it's really exciting. And I guess my question is, so what's wrong? Like, what's the challenge? Why isn't this happening? Like, you listen to each of the people who spoke already, any one of them have an answer that's better than half the stuff that you hear at SOCAP or at these other events where it has become commodified and you're in this pitching posture and blah, blah, blah. So what else is wrong with this conversation? How do we unstick some of this to capture that potential that I think we're all really thirsting for?
I mean, when Elliot was asking if I could come here today, I think he expressed it really well. I mean, this idea of unity and direct peer relationships. I mean, that's what people move in trust, in community, and in right relationship around things they're passionate about. And if you think about like how philanthropy works, like it's who you're in with and what's touched your life. That's what people do, the most precious of treasure deployment that they're gifting, perhaps one might say. And so I think that we need to disintermediate our unity. And that's not so easy to do. It's life's work of a lot of people probably in this room and then create architectures that are just like the easiest, most natural ways to fall forward into collective action and collective intelligence together. That's kind of the root of it. It's like, it's that simple and stupid. It's like we need to be in relationship with each other and stop the gatekeeping. This gatekeeping stuff is baloney. It's just not healthy. It's not human, and it depersonalizes our attachment, our ability to wrangle our resources into right relationship with the earth and the people that we're in community with.
Interesting. Jeff?
And I think similarly, some of the things I would look at there, as Elliot's done, as Lauren does with many of the folks in our communities, saying, where's that interconnectedness? One of the very first exercises we do with folks is we actually draw out a mapping exercise saying, who needs to know about what you care about? And vice versa, who needs to be in that circle as well? And it is engaging. I mean, it is one of those things. Folks do say, this is where my heart is. And we're seeing that with folks that are, on the older generation saying, we're looking at that saying, we're going to leave our legacy. This matters. How are we going to do that? Folks on the younger generation coming in saying, hey, we'd like to change things. We'd like to influence things, leave this, take this and make this better for the generations that are right here. And a lot of those folks that are in that transitional stage between them saying, we've got a unique opportunity to inform that conversation, to help educate and say, we have life experience that is worthwhile. We also still have some energy and some capital to say, where are we going to deploy this and make our differences? And that, I think, is the great connection point there, saying, how do all these people need to meet and connect? And to your point, minimize the gatekeeping, just to say, look, you're of interest. Elliot said we should meet. We ought to connect.
Yeah. What I love about what both you're saying is that it's this notion of legacy is something you live, not something you leave. It is like it's an active form of engagement with self and other, if you will, right? And I think that, Albert Einstein is supposed to have said, and then I've seen that he never said this, so I don't know if he said it or not, but if given an hour to solve a problem on which his life depended, he would take 55 minutes to think about the question and then only 5 minutes to come up with the solution, because with that reflection, and I think that, you mentioned the right mindful approach to this, and he mentioned, mindfulness, and I think it's within the Buddhist community, there's a saying, or some Buddhist communities, don't do something, sit there. And I think part of our Western finance, Silicon Valley fucked up inclination is we lead with the solution instead of sitting more deeply with the fundamental challenges and questions that we're actually trying to solve for. And so I think that that's really the opportunity that families really have as a luxury in our context, because they can actually stop. You can pause and you can think about, one of the families I work with in Hong Kong, we talk about the 1,000-year family. And how do you approach wealth management from that mindset? And the thing that's really cool is that if you really take that seriously, over generations, the family becomes the village, becomes the society. And what's interesting is that even working and watching with this family grapple with that implication, they don't really want to go there. And so that's part of the process of kind of engaging and exploring and sitting with people and supporting that process of, again, in a Buddhist frame, being and becoming, being fully present and owning kind of like who you are and how you show up, and that is who you are, right? So like, get over it. And we're all in the process of evolving towards something else as individuals and as a community of practice. And so embracing that process. You were raising your hand?
If you're taking questions. So you were talking, Tim, who you're in with and what's touched your life as kind of relationships to how philanthropy or investment is engaged. But then you were speaking just now about the need for spaciousness, for us to have enough time and space to really work with the context of any given conversation. So I'm just wondering, how do you subsidize that sitting, so to speak, especially when folks are in scarcity, no matter how much they have, if they're feeling like they're in scarcity, it's just like we have trauma-informed philanthropy, we need trauma-informed investment, trauma-informed capitalism. So any reflections on that?
I'm sorry, but apparently we've run out of time for this session.
Because it was too bad. It was a really good question that we had lots of brilliant answers to.
So here's the trick, right? Is that it's all good, okay? Like, where you stand depends on where you sit. And how you engage is how you're meant to be present in that process. And families of wealth have a certain level of luxury. They have a certain level of burden. Like, when you think about impact investing, and this is going to sound really weird, but the first impact that ultra high net worth people have with their wealth is on themselves and their kids, and how fucked up you can become in the process of having to navigate being a responsible wealth holder. What does that mean? And that sounds really weird to say, right? Because we're all like, well, give me $1 billion. I'd know what to do with it, right? I mean, and it's really hard for a lot of folks to get out of their way to navigate what this looks like. And, so what reference was made to Builder's Vision, I think there are folks out there who are doing really great work engaging ultra high net worth peers around what does it look like to do this? How do you do this differently? And then I think for those of us who are not ultra high net worth, you almost don't have the option of embracing a scarcity mindset, because at the end of the day, this is your life. And, I reached a point in my own process where I started my career in youth and community development, working with homeless kids, and reached a space where I was just like, this is not it. There's something else that I have to drive toward. And I completely left behind the entire career that I had built in that life and everything else. And I was in a place and time where I was able to do that. And, we all have to look at what it means. But ultimately, none of us can stay where and as we are, because we are all on that process and on that journey. So that's what I say. Elliot?
thank you all so much. Sorry to cut things short, but
No.
Very, very rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.